In this Around the Table, Sherry, Robin, Dana, and I are joined by guest Danielle Zapchenk to talk about how we experience God in our stories.
So welcome everyone to the Deepening Communities Around the Table. I don't know if you remember, but back in February, we talked about our stories and why stories matter. So much so that at the Deepening Weekend, Dana has an entire talk about how stories matter, their significance, inviting us to see God as the author and finisher of our stories. So tonight we have a really special guest with us to continue that conversation about stories. But first, Robin, will you pray for our time together tonight?
Sure. Okay, sure. Let's pray. Loving God, thank you for the opportunity to gather together, to be together from all over different parts of the country. Thank you for these women, for these hearts who are here joining us tonight, as well as those who will listen later. And we know you're with us, God. Thank you that you're with us. Thank you that you are our guide and our comforter and our counselor. And we just invite you tonight, your presence, your that you would knit our hearts together in a supernatural way, even through the screens. Thank you so much for Danielle joining us tonight. I pray that as we talk about story, that you just would infuse our time with your goodness and just the fullest intention of your heart for our time together tonight. May this time be sweet and helpful and significant and important and encouraging and all the things that you have for us, all of the goodness we pray. In Jesus' name, pray your blessing over our time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, Robin. So let's check in and see how everyone's coming in tonight. Robin, how are you coming in tonight? In a word or a sentence?
Well, last time you mentioned something about how I smelled like something I had been cooking.
Yes.
So
you don't smell like that tonight. I did notice.
Beef stew. So
I don't smell
it. and pumpkin muffins. So I've just
Oh.
been quite the happy homemaker today. I've cooked a lot more in this one day than I typically do in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'm coming in feeling very satisfied with how well I have set us up for the next few days, Michael and me.
Sounds accomplishing.
Yeah. Yeah. Feels good.
How about you, Dana? How are you coming in tonight?
I'm coming in. I'm still doing laundry from our trip to Hatteras. A few of us went camping for about a week, and we emptied our RV of all of our bedding and everything. And so I'm still doing laundry and thanking God that I'm on just about my last load and happy to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that reentry, right? So much fun and then so much to do afterwards.
Yes. Yeah.
So good to be here. Thanks, Dana. So would you tell us in the chat, everyone, how you're coming in tonight? Because
Sherry, how are you coming in? Or is that?
I'm getting there.
All right.
I forgot. Oh, how am I coming in? I'm not going to say forgetful. I'm coming in. You asked a great question when we were away at the beach, Dana, at one of our sunset happy hours. And you asked about our soul catching up with us. And I came back from that trip having felt like my soul had caught up with me. And so, so I've kind of spent the week trying not to get ahead of it again, trying to keep my soul right here with me. So
I love that.
I'm coming in. Thanks for asking, Dana.
It's good.
So yes, we would love to hear how you're coming in tonight, everyone. So if you'd put that in the chat, we'd love to go back and read those afterwards, because we can't read them while we're talking, but we want to know. We care and we want to know how you're coming in. So Maggie, how are you coming in tonight?
Thank you. I'm coming in. I kind of resonate with you, Sherry, on just my soul catching up, but for different reasons. My family, my youngest had an accident in PE class and had all sorts of teeth and stitches and issues. And it was really, really intense for several weeks. So we're coming on the other side of that. And it was a beautiful day of getting to paint in my studio today and spend some time with people and just looking forward to a cool weekend ahead of me. So feel present and relaxed. So that's lovely.
Mhm.
Okay, so I get to introduce our guest for tonight. Danielle Zapchenk is with us, and she's from Chicago, the Chicago area. She is a gatherer of stories and an asker of curious questions. Whether over a cup of coffee or laughing on her back porch, Danielle has a passion for helping others know that their stories matter. She's a speaker, teacher, and the host of the Parable podcast and another podcast called Together We Rise, which is an offering of women's speaker. I can't say that right. Women Speakers Collective. Her background includes event management at a zoo, which I feel like that needs a whole conversation, but we're not going to go there today. 12 years of leading women's ministry and all things communication at West Ridge Community Church. Danielle and her husband, Eric, have 2 fantastic kids, and they call the northwest suburbs of Chicago home. Danielle and I first connected a couple years ago now when we were both helping a mutual friend, Aubrey Sampson, launch a book. And I personally just love Danielle's heart for story and her amazing ability to draw people out on her podcast and in real life. So Danielle, welcome. And how are you coming in tonight?
Well, gosh, thank you so much, Maggie. Before we even started, I'm just like so grateful to be here. This is such a kind space. I am feeling freed, like a sense of like breaking off of like things that are not so great, that have like held on. And we can talk about that a little more. I feel like that goes into one of my stories I'm going to share tonight, but it's a good place to be. Yeah.
Yeah, love that. Thank you.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, and just to let you guys know, the Parable podcast is Danielle's baby and 115 episodes in. And the whole thing is about sharing people's stories. And Danielle interviews men and women and asks them to share their God stories. And we as a group are so curious, like, how did this concept of people's stories mattering, how did that first come to you and begin to really resonate to the point where you started a whole podcast around it? Sherry was saying earlier when we were talking, we all love story so much that it's part of our weekend, but none of us actually started a podcast about it.
Yeah.
Would you tell us kind of some of that beginning of the podcast, the inspiration behind and your love of story?
Sure. Well, I think my husband, he's been telling me to do a podcast for about 2 years, and I just was like, no, this is not going to happen. And the story part of my life, I feel like that just comes naturally to me. That's just something I just do. And so for me, if I wanted to start a podcast, I had to find a way of like what am I naturally about? And that's people's stories. I go to get my oil change and I come home and I tell a friend or my husband, like, hey, I met this guy and basically here's his life story. And they're like, well, how did you do that? And I'm like, well, I just asked. And I think, some of those natural things about us, we just don't even recognize because it's just a part of who we are, who God created us to be. So I think that there was just a moment of like, what is the goal of any podcast? And I mean, everybody has a story to share. And so I think even though I want to hear other people's stories, I think the same resonates with us, that we need to know our own story, who we are. Sometimes the story is messy. Sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes it's really funny. And so we have all these little bits and pieces of all these different stories. And I just have always loved Jesus's parables as well. And so I love alliteration. And so I was like, parable podcast. Okay. And then from that, I'm like, well, we all have parables a part of our life. And so it's just kind of trying to find those nuggets of where God has shown up. And the reality is he's everywhere. So asking people to talk about themselves is actually not too challenging. You just have to be willing to ask the question.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Okay, so we get to turn the microphone on you tonight. Normally you are the asker of the questions, and we have been, because all four of us, Robin, Sherry, Dana, and I, have been on your podcast.
Yes.
And we'll talk more about that in a second, but we get to be the reversal role tonight. So
I
we
love
want
it.
to hear a God story in your life.
Yeah.
We would love, your story does matter, Danielle. Your
Mhm.
voice matters.
Thank you.
And we want to let you speak and give you that opportunity to share what the Lord, how you have experienced God in your story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think for me, I feel a story that always at least is in my head and that I always have to try to get out is that I'm not good enough. So maybe you have felt that same feeling before, like you don't measure up, or maybe you're wondering, does my story matter? Does God care about the little things? And the truth is that he does. And so one of the times I started not feeling good enough is when I was 16. I really remember it well, being told by my best friend at the time that I was just too much and I needed to suppress my joy, the person who God created to be. Now, I probably had some finessing to do myself being a teenager, as many teenagers do. But I just began to second guess and doubt my own decisions. And it wasn't overnight. It just she made me feel this way that I wasn't good enough. And even though we still had fun, I thought, okay, well, she loves Jesus. Why is she like asking me to like tamper myself down, if you will? But I feel like her own past and her own hurts spilled into our relationship, and I just became collateral damage. And it was a cycle that I didn't realize that I put myself in. But college came, and even miles away couldn't prepare me for just the breaking point that we ended up having. And God helped me realize that this wasn't healthy and it was time to end our friendship. And so those flippant words, though, of being good enough, even though that friendship had ended, it still just was like rolling around in every part of my head. It was when I was doing my job, as I was navigating my marriage, while I was changing diapers, So I was just like holding on to all these little things. And I'm pretty sure that I'm probably not the only one that still hashes those things out over in my head. So a couple months ago, I had a small group conversation, and I was kind of just sharing the truth about how I was feeling about this. And I feel like life calls you to so many tasks, and creating adult friendships is hard. And so for me, I wanted to start creating this relationship, but I was like, I don't know if I can trust this person. So this girl, Carrie, she invited me into her life. She kind of shared her story, and she gave the opportunity to share mine. And it was really quite simple. But the big deal is, after I got home that night, I just felt like God saying, like, Danielle, I need you to text Carrie and just tell her like what this moment meant for you, that you're kind of like on the beginning of this friendship. And I don't know about you, but there are certain names that stick out to you. And so Carrie was the name of that friend that I had in high school. And so I just was like, oh, I don't know. So I sent the text, and she's just one of the most generous and honest people. And I'm just grateful for that friendship. So even though it was one Carrie that broke my heart 20 years ago, and now this present day Carrie has really redeemed that story for me, that name. That one little moment helped me heal. But just a few minutes later, Carrie responded that she wouldn't, that I probably wouldn't believe, that the friend that hurt her, she had shared about earlier that night as well. Her name was Danielle.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And so
Oh my God.
You can't make this stuff up.
No,
I
No
can't.
kidding.
I can't. And so I just was like, okay, God, I know, it's taken like a long time for me to just like get over that. And it's just a part of my story. And it's hard for me to trust people sometimes. But I just felt like God in that moment was saying like, hey, I've seen you and I'm going to redeem this. And I think for all of us, we're just like waiting for that moment that we have that aha moment that God's like, okay, He's going to redeem that part of your story, no matter how big or small we may think it is. So that's just a little bit there for you.
I love the courage that
Mhm.
you had to embark on this new Carrie friendship, because
Yeah.
I think that took a lot of courage, and a lot of courage to send the text after and to share your story. I mean, that just, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
courageous step. It's
Thank
beautiful.
you. Thanks.
Mhm.
Sounds like a lot of risk too, that
Mhm.
you had been so hurt, and
Mhm.
even to have her name be a reminder
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
that hurt and that betrayal. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just see the risk that you took and the vulnerability in taking that risk
Mhm.
for
And
both of you.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes I think even, you're like, does that really even matter? Like, do names matter? Like, does this, do I have to keep hashing this up? But I think the reality is we get lost in these narratives that we keep playing over and over in our head. And that's where the devil wants to keep us, right? Is that, when we don't share, when we don't tell our story, it just keeps on going and we don't have anyone to speak that truth into our lives. And so it's in those moments of why the story matters is you want to break that narrative, because the reality is like there is good on the other side.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Wow,
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Mhm.
sure.
It speaks to me too, Danielle, that it doesn't seem like there is a getting over it. It
Mm.
seems to me that there are moments of opportunity
Mhm.
that we get to choose to risk, to be vulnerable, to say yes, or to continue to self-protect or hide
Mhm.
or whatever. The options are so, we have so many options, right?
Yeah.
But it sounds like this was a real pivotal moment that you stepped into, and um it seems like healing happened, not and it wasn't just a getting over, but it
Mm.
was a really beautiful movement towards where Jesus brought some healing and some restoration and redemption. And I'm sure I imagine that's ongoing
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I
more
think
to come.
so the word that I shared about being freed, I mean, yeah, that was about like a year or so ago that moment happened, and I will forever remember that. However, just because you say, okay, I've done it, I am free. It's not it, you have to realize that, that was the tape that I was playing for 20 years in my head. So we have to really work on undoing that. So like just the other week, I was at a conference and there was like some of those words, and this one beautiful woman named Rochelle, she just like prayed over me, and she's like, we need to break this off, because not to say that it hasn't happened, but you're holding on to it and in such a way that it's just holding you back. And so yeah, I think it's a constant asking ourselves the question, kind of like what you even shared, like coming in, like, where are we?
Mhm.
How is that, when you're having your time with God, be like, this kind of feels like this is taking center stage right now, just like asking so it's like learning other people's questions for me, but I feel like it's also just asking yourself those tough questions as well. And it's uncomfortable, but it's worth it.
Mm.
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 Yeah, and it sounds disrupting,
Mhm.
right? Disrupting to risk embarking on a friendship like that again, and disrupting that narrative that you've been living with for 20 years.
Mm.
And such a very necessary disruption.
Mhm.
Yeah. 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 It is, I think, disruption. I think when we hear when I think about stories, and why I like listening to other people's stories as well, is one, it helps me better empathize with other people, because sometimes we think we know something, or we think how it's supposed to be, or how it looks like it's perceived on the outside. But once we get to connect, once we go deeper with people and ask just like some 2 questions down, we're not even going that far deep. it just like, it helps shift our perspective, and it helps me at least truly empathize and understand, okay, maybe I've never experienced this situation, this scenario before, but I can now understand and better love you as a sister, as a friend, as just a fellow believer, and like just sit with where you are at. It doesn't mean that I have to fix it. It doesn't mean that I have to like do anything. I'm just gonna sit and I get to like be with them in their own story.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say too. I hear there's a curiosity in you, both for the person that you're sitting with, as well as for your own story, and and a curiosity for what's coming up for you. Like it's the both and.
Yeah. I think when I was writing today down of like, okay, here's what I want to tell you about like why I ask other people questions, but really it is, you're right. It goes both ways. And it is a real gift. And it's something that, let me just tell you, like I do this really well when I can sit here and I can focus. But if I'm trying to be making dinner, okay, or if I am like really focused on a task, like I'm not asking good questions. Okay. So this is something that you have to learn over time, and you have to be intentional with. So I can be really great sometimes, and sometimes I can't, but I feel like that's a balance and something that we just have to continually learn.
And yet at the beginning you shared about, and maybe it was before we even started recording, you shared about how you would come home from different places and tell your husband about people that you've met, and you tell their entire life stories and how mystified he was. Like, how do you know this?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's also just a tip, is asking open-ended questions. I mean, you don't even have to ask the question, but I mean, it's just starting. Like there was this gentleman when I was getting an oil change, I don't know, he ended up like sharing that, he had to be, his dad passed away when he was 16, and he remembers this guy coming in and saying that was his dad's friend. He's just like, well, now you're the man of the house. And so like, just asking like, well, how did that make you feel? And then he just goes like, it's just facilitating almost, and just being there to ask intentional questions. And I know we're about to get to the holiday table. You guys are probably in small groups or just in places of community. So if you're like, gosh, I just want to go deeper, it's in the questions. Like that's how you get there. Instead of saying, do you like broccoli? Yeah.
Right.
That's not going to do it. I mean, unless it's a broccoli group, I don't know. So
well, and it feels like a lost art. I mean, I think about even you in the oil change place, and I'm thinking about it because I went to physical therapy yesterday morning, and I'm in this waiting room, and I'm standing and walking around a little bit, waiting for my turn. And I would engage someone in conversation, except they are all with their phones. I mean, there is no opportunity for conversation because they are so engaged with their phones. And I'm thinking, gosh, I remember when it wasn't that way. So it almost feels, how do you even enter into conversations like that? And maybe that's not the place.
Yeah.
But I think about the richness of, I mean, who knows if anybody asked that man questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the gift you gave him.
Yeah.
Because you did.
Right.
So it just makes me curious about finding those opportunities and maybe disrupting people with their phones.
Yeah, with the conversation that Dana and I just had on the podcast, I think we kind of had a little conversation about, this world is social media. Like I love social media. However, like there's so much we know, but really that we don't know about each other. Like we put up our highlight reels and whatever else, but we don't really know each other. And I think there's so many people that are lonely and just like walking along the streets that are just waiting for somebody to like ask them how they're doing. How are you coming to the table today? Right.
And speaking of our time together, I want to ask you a question that I didn't ask during the podcast, but I was curious about what triggered the tears I think I remember, you asked me about speaking at Zoe, and what was it? why do I can't remember exactly the question, but I was talking about just that I have a story. I have something to say. I have a voice, and I want women to know that they have a voice too. And
Yeah.
tears were evoked there for you. And I was curious about why that was, and where did that come from? What bubbled up?
Yeah, I think it goes back to like that same person of just being like, I feel like one time, like I was told like I was too much, like I'm trying to be the center of attention. So that was like one of the things I struggled with before even starting the podcast. And I told that to my husband as we were gathering our ideas of trying to like share my story. I'm like, is this too much? Is this what I'm doing? And he's just like, why are you letting like those words like hang over you? Like that's not who you are at all. And so I think like when I think about my story and sharing my story, like it matters to me, Dana. And I, if I feel like so passionate about it, even though it was very challenging, like I know, like I just want so many other women to be able, and men, I should say,
Yeah.
to share their stories as well. I think about my daughter. We have a 13-year-old daughter, and just to know that she matters. And I led women's ministry for 12, 13 years. And I've got to hear a lot of stories there as well. And there is just like a lot of women living in quiet desperation, just waiting to share their story. And they just feel like they can't. And so when I feel that, I feel that for myself, I feel that for the world. We were talking about this before we started. I'm just like a very, very emotional person, which I'm embracing. But I just feel like in those moments, I don't know, I started crying because I felt all of those things when you started sharing that. Yeah.
So on behalf of yourself and on behalf of others, which
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Well, yeah, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I think of the women that you invite onto your podcast, Danielle, and I'm thinking of how we can bring, I'm so curious. We don't have time to talk about it, but I'm curious about the stories that women bring and how shiny our stories might be that we bring. But it's how you engage the stories that really, I really noticed in real time how you may have had a direction you were wanting to go with me. I don't know. But as I shared, as you asked questions, you were so engaged and tracking with me and really hearing me. And then you would ask another question that drew me out more. That was I don't know another way to say it, but just your beautiful engagement that took me deeper and allowed me the space to consider and be curious and be it present in that moment to even what the Spirit of God might be. It just was, you have that beautiful gift. And so I think of, we can do that for each other.
Yeah.
Even if we might think we need to bring our shiny selves, our shiny stories, our polished stories. But what a gift to be able to do what you do, and that we can even learn to do better with each other, to ask good questions and engage in a way that where we draw each other out, even like your story with your friend, your new friend, right? And the beauty that can come in relationship, in story, in shared stories. I love this whole conversation and what you do, what you invite.
Well, my mom, my mom and dad listen every week. And so they're just like, so do you know these people? Like, have you talked to them? And really, I mean, I don't really do any research, and I have like a few questions, but I have no idea what the parable story is that they're going to share it. And most of the time I'm like, what? But it's really just being curious. And so I would say for each one of us, as we go throughout our day, like we always want to know something more, and not to be in like a weird way, but just because like I care about you, like I want to understand. I think that in the relationship, if you have like a really great friendship, why does somebody act the way that they do? Like, what were they thinking? Did they like were they upset with God in that moment? Because we're all going to have a different reaction. So as somebody's just telling me their story, I'm just like thinking, um, it's just like something I do. And so I would encourage you, if this is not like come natural to you, that's okay. But we all have something that is like completely natural to us, that we can engage in. Maybe like Dana, I know you make a great table, like you make people feel comfortable. Maybe you just like make an amazing spreadsheet, and like you know how to like account and get things in order. Like I just think we need to lean into the things that we think, oh, this doesn't really matter. Like, because that makes like we have like a space that God is going to use us in. But yeah, it's definitely a practice to continually to be able to grow in, is something for all of us. Yeah.
And how beautiful for your husband to be one of the voices that says, hey, this comes natural to you. Didn't you realize this? Oh,
Yes.
yeah, it does.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's been awesome to see how God uses both of our talents. My husband's been in radio for over 20 years.
Oh, wow.
You can hear his story. It's so beautiful. He hated being on, but oh my gosh, like I just like sometimes when I forget his story. And so when you go back and listen, I'm just like, I can't even believe this happened to you.
What one is that?
Yeah, I'll look up the number.
Okay.
I'll put it in the chat in a few seconds.
Great.
But yeah, he has a great skill at editing, and so I'm fortunate that he is my editor, because that is a challenging part. You know, if you want to do a podcast, sometimes you're not also willing to do editing at the same time. You learn a lot of things. So, but he's great. He's an amazing supporter, and I am grateful for him. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a great episode. That was one of the first ones I listened to. I listened to the one with Maggie the first time, and then I listened to that one because I was curious, just with his story of divorce and remarriage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
piqued my curiosity.
yeah.
Danielle, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I love what you've brought to stories, and how the way you ask questions, and that, Robin, how you were talking about like how asking good questions keeps people in their stories. Because I think so often in conversations, naturally, one person's talking and it's like their turn, now it's my turn. Or even if I've talked a long time, I feel uncomfortable and like I want to throw it back to the other person.
Yeah.
And I love the way in the podcast, because really it is about the person you're interviewing, that it helps you stay in that story, but it is practice to help keep that person in their story. And like Robin, like you were saying, like it adds that curiosity, and you get to just sit in it a little longer, and that is just such a gift. I think that's the heart gift that you give people on your podcast and in friendship, and that I feel like we try to practice here. That I feel like I've gleaned from being with you all.
Oh, thank you.
For real. But anyway, it's been so good to be with you. And so everyone who's listening, each of us got to be on the Parable podcast, and the first one to actually air was in September, and that was actually Michael's story. So if you look up the Parable podcast on Spotify or wherever you listen, you can scroll back, and Michael's was in September, and then Sherry and SJ shared their story in October of their divorce not working out. But I loved listening to Sherry's because I know Sherry well, and I learned things about Sherry as she and SJ told their story, and it just anew in a different way, and the questions you asked, and it was lovely. And then Dana, her interview was just released yesterday. And then Robin's is going to be next month and in December. And then mine is going to be in January, my second one, because Danielle interviewed me long ago. So we have just loved this collaboration with you, Danielle, and we're just so thankful for just the friendship that's developed from
Aw.
each of these conversations. And just thank you.
Well,
being
thank you so
interested.
much for trusting me and letting me hold space for all of you. I appreciate that. And I'm excited to get to know all of you more.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Likewise, because
Yeah,
there's always
thank you.
more. Mhm.
You do it
Yeah.
so well. You do it beautifully.
Mhm.
Holding the
Mhm.
space, asking the
Mhm.
questions, being
Yes.
curious. You do it beautifully.
Mhm.
You.
How does your heart respond to this conversation with Danielle? Would you share with us in the comments? We would love to know. Also, be sure to check out the video description below. We have loaded this with all sorts of ways to dig deeper in how to experience God in our stories. We've also included links for Danielle's podcasts. And we would love to invite you to our monthly Around the Table Zoom calls, where we invite you to speak in the second half and share with us. You can find the Zoom link at thedeepeningcommunity.com. If you enjoyed this video, would you take a moment to like it, share it, and subscribe to Zoe's YouTube channel? Thanks, and see you next time.